Bostonians have had the weekend to chew over the news that the Olympics could be coming to the city in 2024. The U.S. nominating committee picked Boston to represent the nation last week. But as WGBH News reporter Ann Mostu tells us, not everyone is ready to pick up the torch just yet.
The group Boston 2024 is taking a victory lap after its bid to host the Summer Games was selected by the United States Olympic Committee.
Wow, can you believe this?
But as boosters prepare to pit Boston against international venues also vying for the Games, sentiments from Boston residents are mixed.
I guess I would be a little bit nervous about traffic and the general influx of having a lot of people in the area and how that might impact us, but otherwise I think it could be exciting.
I would definitely love to see the Olympics in Massachusetts, yeah. I think it would probably be good for the city as well.
We're from London, and when it came to London, it was really, it had a really good impact on morale in the city, and it brought everyone together, and it was great.
Mixed feelings on the idea aside, people around the city have many questions about how officials would pull off their plans.
Where do you put all these people? I know there's dormitories and all that, but what do you do with the stadiums and transportation and things like that? I mean, transportation's already terrible around here as it is.
Some of those questions are slowly being answered. Boston 2024 says 3/4 of the sporting events would take place on college campuses and would be accessible by public transportation. An Olympic Village would go up near UMass Boston. But Mayor Marty Walsh says taxpayers would not be forced to foot the bill.
Made it perfectly clear from the very beginning, we are not going to be using taxpayers' money to be building venues in the city of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Walsh and Boston 2024 presented a $4.5 billion proposal to the USOC in December. That proposal has not been made public yet, but Governor Baker cautiously called the Games an opportunity.
I was very pleased to hear the mayor's comments about the transparency that he plans to bring to this process.
And Walsh did promise the most open, inclusive, and transparent process in Olympic history, Adam. That begins on January 27th when he has his first of 9 public meetings, and it's going to be at Suffolk Law School to start.
Okay, so who will pay for the infrastructure changes that might be needed to make this happen?
We will, Adam, the public. I mean, that's what's going to happen.
You and me.
You and I, yep.
And what's the price tag that we're looking at in terms of infrastructure?
From what I've heard, it's about $5 billion. I mean, the Boston 2024 group has come up with $4.5 billion that they say they can generate in private financing.
Right, for the venues and that kind of thing.
Right, for the construction of venues, and the infrastructure is going to be on the state and city.
How about security costs?
The federal government will always cover that for U.S. Games.
And what is the next step for the opponents?
The opponents are a group, the most organized group is called No Boston Olympics, and they're going to have a public meeting on Wednesday night this week, and they may be putting out a ballot referendum for the Olympics.
All right, Ann, thanks very much.
Okay.
Well, most local politicians are signaling their strong support of this proposal. One who's come out as a strong opponent is Evan Falchuk, who's referred to the idea as the son of the big dig. Evan is also the head of the newly formed United Independent Party and a former candidate for governor. Evan, welcome back to Greater Boston.
Glad to be here.
So why, as you see it, is Boston Olympics a bad idea?
Well, first of all, we haven't seen what's even in the proposal that was made to the U.S. Olympic Committee. So the dribs of information that are starting to come out and the fact that the process so far has been very non-transparent is a very worrisome sign. What we've seen in prior Olympics, like the one in London and other places, is at the beginning, we say it's only going to cost a few $1 billion. As it turns out, it ends up being multiples of that. In London, it was about 13 or 14 billion. Several $1 billion worth of state money or government money was used to support that. I think we're on that same track here in Massachusetts.
Now, hasn't Marty Walsh said that they've taken out some sort of insurance policy that will protect them against cost overruns?
They did. They took out a $25 million insurance policy on a $5 billion event. So even if the insurance policy covers any cost overrun of any kind, that's like constructing a $100,000 house and taking out a policy for $500. It's really not a real policy.
One argument, as you know, that people who back the idea of a games have been making is, well, these are the elected officials who you've put in place to make decisions like this. So if you don't like, say, Marty Walsh's advocacy of a Boston 2024 Games, in 3 years, when you have a chance to vote, you can vote against him. Do you buy that argument?
Well, here's the problem. This affects everybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. To the extent taxpayer money will be used for these purposes, taxpayers have a right to have a say in this. The process that took place, which involved submitting a bid to the U.S. Olympic Committee, has already happened. And so we have been selected as the U.S. choice. Now Massachusetts voters are being required to go through this public process. It's exactly backwards. It's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, where it's verdict after, sentence first.
That actually is something that I've been sort of struggling to wrap my brain around. I mean, Marty Walsh has said, we're going to have 9 meetings. This is going to be incredibly transparent and open. And yet it seems like the outcome is a foregone conclusion, right? Because there's no indication that anything anyone says will stop the bid in its tracks.
The most transparent process would actually involve the bid being released to the public, which they have not done. Not sure why. The people behind it are connected and they're smart. And if they thought it was in their best interest to make the bid public, they would. They've chosen not to. I think that's a worrisome sign.
So let me ask you, if the No Boston Olympics people or anyone else organizes to put this on the statewide ballot, as the head of one of our political parties here in Massachusetts, would you mobilize the United Independent Party to work against an Olympic Games?
Well, we would mobilize to be in support of a referendum. And so much of what we did with founding the United Independent Party was saying our government needs to be transparent and accountable to voters. This is a poster child for the kind of situation that we see happening so often. Connected people are able to drive policymaking in our state, and voters are left on the sidelines being told it'll be okay, don't worry about it.
So are you, you say you would organize to put this on the ballot. Is that organizing already going on? I mean, have you been talking with the No Boston Olympics people?
I've certainly watched what they've been doing. I know they've been taking a lead. We've put up on our website a No Olympics petition to try to get as many people involved in this as possible. People need to have their voice heard in an organized way. They need, our legislators need to hear about this from their constituents to say, listen, I don't want my taxpayer money being used in this way without me giving you permission to do so.
You're talking about a statewide vote. Marty Walsh has said that he doesn't think the citizens of Boston need to vote on it because, as he explained it to me a few weeks back, he thinks that it's clear that the majority of people in the city back it. Would you like to see a vote at the city level, too?
Well, this is democracy. It's interesting that the Boston Globe, for example, described the people behind the Olympics as a power elite, which starts to sound a little bit like an aristocracy. We don't need that in this country. So voting is good. It's a little bit ironic because the mayor has been suing to have a vote over the casino. So we ought to have votes on things that are big and important and massive expenditures of money, certainly across the state, since this is going to be a substantial amount of taxpayer money involved.
Tell me a little bit about the state of the United Independent Party at this point in time. How many people have stepped up to say that they're going to run for office under the UIP banner?
Well, we've now had about a couple dozen people come to us to say they want to enroll. Our biggest priority for this year is to register voters and enroll them in the United Independent Party. Those candidates will come in 2016. But to continue to have official status in Massachusetts, we've got to get 1% of voters enrolled in the United Independent Party. We're about to kick off a big voter registration drive to coincide with Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month, given a lot of the things that are happening in our country. But the most important thing voters can do is get involved. We start to see with what's happening with the Olympics an example of what happens when powerful interests are allowed to have their way with voters. It comes out of your pocket.
Just so I'm clear, and this is a little bit getting into minutia, but it's important stuff. If you don't have 1% of registered voters here in Massachusetts sign up to join the UIP, but you have candidates who reach a certain threshold, like you, for example, getting 3% in the governor's race, would you keep party status or not?
No, the way the rules work is that you've got to have 3% in a statewide election or have 1% of voters enrolled in the party, and that's measured by November of 2016. We've got an aggressive goal of getting 50,000 people enrolled in the party. You need 43,000 to have that status. We are going to be the second party in Massachusetts. We intend to be the fastest growing party in Massachusetts and to bring about this kind of a change.
Briefly, when do you have to decide if you're going to run for governor again?
Whenever the deadline might be in 2017, 2018.
What are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking it's a long way off, and we've got a lot to do between now and then. We got to get those 50,000 people enrolled. We got to get some great candidates on the ballot, smart, independent-minded people in 2016, and we'll bring about that kind of smart, brave reform we fought so hard for in this election.
All right, Evan Falchuk, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.